Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of The Legacy Leaders. Today I have Dan Farkas. He is the professor of strategic communications at Ohio University and just so happens to be the founder of Past PR. Lots of knowledge inside this guy's brain, so I don't want to waste too much time before we tap into it. So, Dan, the camera, the microphone are yours. Introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background and how you got to be at OU. Also, what's it all about at Past PR?
Blind luck. I'm not sure that's an appropriate answer. So my journey, 10 years of television news, everything but the weather. Got out because my wife also worked in TV and we never had the same day off. Was involved in statewide communication for an autism education project. And at some point in time, the idea of going on my own and teaching simultaneously presented themselves. And I thought I would do that for 10 weeks and see how it went. That was back in 2010, so it seems as though it has gone reasonably well. And the joy of being at Ohio University, and I was at Ohio University, I was at Ohio State, I'm now back at Ohio U. It has always been work and practice, meaning they want me to be in the space. So everything I teach, I do through that lens of past PR. So any form of strategic communication, whether it is marketing, PR, advertising, getting teams on the same page, thinking creativity, focus stuff. How do we use communication to make the world a better place? That's sort of the TLDR version.
Damn, that's really good. So 10 weeks turns into 15 years of a pretty successful business, pretty successful going out on your own. I'm assuming now you and your wife take vacation on the same day.
We do. We do. Things are a little, there are still ships passing in the night. That is because of children's obligations and other good things. But from a scheduling perspective, I have the ability to design my day a lot more now than I used to. We'll say that.
Okay, so how does that come about? How is it, Dan, that you get to design your own day? Because I'm assuming, as a business owner, anybody listening to us, they have that same aspiration, right? How do you build a business that'll work without you being there? So, what is it that you've done over the 15 years of doing this to give you that flexibility?
Someone once told me about changing the idea of work life balance
Hmm.
to work life integration. And when he first said it, I wasn't sure, and I pushed back and we talked about it for a little bit. But he made a point that I thought was intriguing on two levels. We all know, and likely all of us have a phone or a device in front of us
Yeah.
where we allegedly are supposed to be checking work email or have that accessibility to do that and take our notes at a moment's notice. If that's going to work, and if that's an environment we create, well, how do we do the other side of that?
Hmm.
Meaning, how can I have those experiences where, like, if I'm on call at 7:30 on a Tuesday, are there going to be moments during the traditional lens of a workday where I may be obligated to doing something else? That was
Hmm.
one side of that conversation. And when I worked in television, like, I felt guilty and felt like I would get in trouble, like going to the doctor for my checkup. That
Yeah.
was almost frowned upon. And in hindsight, it seems just asinine. And I think the other side of that is get things done and do it well. And for me, there are certain things that I'm better at in certain points of the day. And I have been able to find that sweet spot and get work done during times that aren't on a traditional 9 to 5, but also be able to leave at 1 o'clock and go exercise because I think I do a better job when I do that.
Hmm.
And I have that lens of doing it. And it took a while for me to find things that worked and didn't work. But ultimately, it's, when you get up in the day, the 3 or 4 things that need to happen, do it in a way that puts you in the best spot to succeed. That's my take on that.
It's a good take, Dan. And I'm going to kind of put a little bit of caveat on that because I want to have this conversation. There are certain jobs that don't necessarily have the same flexibility that other jobs would have. So I
Sure.
understand the work-life integration and the idea of I'm going to swap being on call at 8 o'clock in the evening for the 1 o'clock in the afternoon.
Mhm.
I'm going to go exercise or a doctor's appointment because there should be a good work-life balance or integration as we're talking. But how do we deal with a line worker or a production crew that doesn't necessarily have that flexibility of a salaried or a long-term performance goal as opposed to today I'm supposed to put this widget in this slot. Does that make sense?
Sure. I think you have to look at all of the things that you're doing and just be able to understand. They always have, what is it, the Eisenhower matrix. Do you include yourself as part of that? Do you include yourself as part of that? And are you your best you when you find yourself in a circumstance where you just are out of it, or like where you don't
Mhm.
have your fastball, or where you're not feeling well, or any of those other things? And even if you're in a situation where you need to be in an office because you are physically making or manufacturing or building something, there is being able to look for ways where you do that in the way that works best for you or an organization. And it's being able to say the traditional realm of 9 to 5 maybe doesn't always work.
Yeah.
And can we look at other options? For example, when you go to Phoenix, they have their construction crews working like from 6 to 2 because they don't want to be outside at 2 o'clock in Phoenix in the summer, right?
Good point.
But they
100.
work very staggered schedules, and so it's looking at things in the sense of, yeah, maybe I have a job where I need to be there every day. If I'm a teacher at a school, I probably need to be in the classroom every day, but I also ought not be ashamed or view a doctor's appointment or some other experience as some sort of scarlet letter on my overall
Yes.
space. And if I'm in a space where I have to be on during this regimented time, in that circumstance when I'm not there, can I invest fully in whatever it is I'm doing? The real
Mhm.
challenge of that is invest fully when you're there and do one thing really well, as opposed to try to balance 7 things at once, which just tends to not work.
Yeah, as much as people believe they're unbelievably good at multitasking, it's been proven we're not good at multitasking as a species. We just don't have the capacity to do three things at once. So one of the things I wanted to tap into, and Dan, I love the conversation because in my head, we have been ingrained into ourselves and into our work environment that everything we do is an hourly based task. If we can pull ourselves away from, well, I was here for 8 hours, I did 8 hours worth of work, therefore I should get paid for 8 hours, and turn it into, you asked me to do 8 hours worth of work from the old schedule. I got it done in 6.5 hours. Can I go home? Well, would you let somebody go home an hour early, an hour and a half early, if they got what they were supposed to get done today done? To me, the answer is yes. I 100% would let you go home because you performed. You did what I asked you to do. And now we may need to readdress or reset the scales. But the answer to me is let's turn ourselves into a performance based organization and not necessarily so much on what did I do for an hour's worth of work? Because I think what we're trying to do is we're trying to push the needle forward so we can be highly performing organizations and allow our integration of work life to a point where people actually get a chance to live both sides of that equation, which is I do my work and I get to enjoy my life. I'd love to know your thoughts.
As a manager slash leader, many people struggle clearly articulating expectation
Mm-hmm.
of what ought to be done. One of the challenges I see in the marketing and communication space, I do a lot of AI training in the lens of how can we potentially identify efficiency in certain tasks. That's part one. A lot of people are doing part one.
Mm-hmm.
Where I have really intriguing conversation is you've saved an hour and a half on project X. What are you doing with that time? And there is not much consensus. selfishly, AI enables me to spend more time connecting with people individually, being more human, and maybe being able to go take my kids to the pool after we're done recording. That's a very, but that's me setting that parameter for me.
Hmm.
Okay, cool, I can do that. A lot of leaders are not really sure how to figure that part of it out yet and don't have that magic answer. And I think that involves having a much more introspective look at your organization, how much you think you can realistically trust your team, and
Hmm.
what you can then build out of that. And in a beautiful world, I like the idea of working with people who say, okay, I can trust you that you're going to get this figured out.
Yeah,
There are many industries where that is not necessarily such a luxury. And you have to be more intentional to say, now that these things are done, let's create other opportunities for you to create value for the organization, and realize that you can create that value for an organization in a bunch of different ways.
I
The
would agree.
challenge I see on all of this is the manager, the leader, the whatever you want to call the person, being able to take that step back and say, what is it that I want people to do with their time?
Hmm.
And what is keeping them around help me do long term for my organization? If I have a high performing person, I want that person to be there in 5 years. I want my best talent to stay.
Hmm.
This, in a strange way, helps me be able to optimize that. And maybe if I have, 5 hours of direct task that they need to do in a day, awesome. Can they spend an hour or two learning something? Can they go volunteer? Can I do things that make them want to stay? There's value in that over time.
Yes. And now we're talking about a real solid work-life integration, right? Because you're getting a chance to be, as you're saying, read something, become better educated or more trained on a task so you can become better down the road, whatever the case may be. But now there's a personal and a professional development that comes into play.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot more to this work-life integration than just, I'm going to get a chance to go to a doctor's appointment. I'm going to get a chance to work because you want me to at 8 o'clock at night. It's how do we merge the lives of our employees into the livelihood that they create for the business? Because the business has to survive as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
So somewhere in between is this mixture or this, I don't want to say homogenization, but I can't think of a better word, of how the business interests and the personal interests come together. And now you've got people willing to go do things for an organization because they know not only the reward is there, but they feel better about doing it, right? There's
Yes.
more to it than just a paycheck.
Yeah. There are very oddly competing layers. Many areas of work, and the legal space, the marketing space, to many degrees the PR and advertising space, they are based on billable hours. They are based on
Mhm.
purely billable hours. That's a very strange pricing model. And especially as you see people sort of move up the ranks in terms of seniority and in terms of the intelligence they can bring into a situation, to your point, I can take a task that allegedly takes 10 hours and do it in 6. Well, how does the compensation for that work? So there's that level of trickiness, but there's also the lens of, the longer I keep people around who know what they're doing, the more efficient we're going to be. And is that something that should be almost punitive in the lens of billable hours versus,
Mhm.
can we be paid fairly for our expertise? My suspicion is, especially as there's more technology coming into play, pricing is going to evolve into that idea of, are you being paid for your expertise or the specialization and what you're bringing to the table? And
Yeah,
selfishly for me, I think that's a good thing, but it is a circumstance where I think a lot of leaders sort of had that set in stone and they just kind of did stuff, and it now feels much more malleable.
I would agree with that. And I think if you really think about the concept of a retainer for, as you mentioned, a law office, they're on retainer. Okay, so you're paying them X amount of dollars to be your retained counsel.
Mhm.
Every time you tap into using them, you have to pay additional service. Perhaps that's your contract. What if we were to alter that a little bit and say, okay, you're on retainer, but if I ever get sued, you now come into play. You are activated, right? Because the performance that we're looking for is I want my business to not be in legal complication. It's a
Sure.
different thought process. I'm just throwing it out there for conversation. Because I think if we look at it from a performance-based metric, it's easier to see the results after the fact than it would be to try to track them as we go, right?
There's a colleague that said something very astute. His name's Mark Riggs. He owns a firm called Pemberton, I believe it's called. And he's like, I hate the word retainer. I never use it. We're going to call it a fixed service agreement. And I'm like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
and why, Mark? And then he explained the logic of the idea of a fixed service agreement to your exact point, Scott, of this is the scope of service we will provide under this lens. As needs arise, we will price these things out accordingly beyond the scope.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing when you talk about it. Boy, you got to write a really good scope of work.
Oh, of course you do. Because as you made comment earlier, the expectations and the communication of said expectations is the foremost important thing that needs to happen either between a leader of an organization and their team or an organization and their counterpart or whoever their vendor would be, right? So those expectations have to be properly communicated. And I think that goes without saying in most business transactions, communication is one of the bigger challenges that we have because you're thinking they're asking you to do one thing and they're actually saying they want something different, right? So I've been taught one of the greatest questions that I've ever heard somebody say is, what did you hear me say?
Mhm.
In other words, I want to make sure whatever came out of my mouth is what went into your ears and into your brain. So tell me, what did I just say? So now we're on the same page, right? It's a very interesting concept.
And how many people took a class on writing a scope of work? Not an undergrad. I'm talking like in their masters. That is one of the last formalities that exist. And with
Yeah.
many organizations, that scope of work has been sitting there untouched for a really long time.
And nobody
Because
knows what to do. And when they go to that SOW, they're thinking, well, here's the rules of the road, and then there's no rules. Or they're so poorly written and communicated that I still have no idea what I'm supposed to do.
and that structure on the front end, I think makes managing teams a heck of a lot easier
Mhm.
because you have some sense of guardrails. And
Yeah.
even though there are so many new bells and whistles, and those are all great and they're all impactful, teams that go back to their original scope and hyper focus through that journey in reevaluating it, there's a lot of headaches you can prevent if you start there.
I would 100% agree. Here's an interesting, I would love to get your thought on this. We're going to solve the problem that is homelessness. I'm going to pay you $250,000 a year to solve the problem of homelessness. How many years is it going to take you, Dan, to solve homelessness? Making that much money a year, how long is it going to take you? It's a rhetorical question, right? So now let me ask you this. I'm going to pay you $75,000 a year for every year it takes you to solve homelessness. But if you get it solved within 5 years, I'll pay you $5 million. How fast will you solve homelessness?
Those are all rules that aren't realistic under the parameters of the situation. They
Well,
just, because there are so many variables beyond someone's control on that. And
the,
and
the
when you
concept I'm going for is, and then again, maybe homelessness is too big of an issue, but let's just say there's a problem in your organization. If I hire somebody to solve that problem and I'm going to pay them every year to keep solving that problem, they're going to keep solving a problem or creating another one.
yeah.
But if I hired somebody with the idea that within the time frame of 5 years, you'll get an actual bonus that that problem is solved, I'm
Mhm.
almost guaranteeing that problem is going to get solved because they're going to focus on fixing it rather than milking it for the next 4 or 5 years.
Deadline spurs action, and that
Yeah.
can be very powerful. I also work with a lot of students, and that deadline creates action, and they don't
Mhm.
manage the time appropriately. I think the other challenge that exists in a lot of different service industries, and I would put marketing, PR, law, a lot of the professional service spaces, I think this is fair to say. When the project's done, or when you see that project at the end, right? You
Mhm.
see a finish line. There is inherent anxiety about what are we going to do next? And will
Mhm.
something exist? And there are many people who have worked brilliantly, brought in all sorts of money for the organization. The project life cycle naturally ends as it's supposed to. And then that person gets tossed aside because there's nothing left coming up on the horizon.
Mhm.
That environment and anxiety probably causes things to last longer than they need to because people are fearful of adjourning and then not having something else to get started with.
Right.
And that goes to a leader or an organizational, whatever you want to call them, being able to say, you know what, Mary, we got something for you when we're done, and
Yeah.
it's going to be just fine.
Yeah. We've actually identified a list of 12 things we want to solve over the course of the next X amount of years. First one
Sure.
we're going to work on is this one. So I want you to build a team and go solve that problem.
Sure.
Right.
And that's one of the biggest issues with teams and projects is they don't have this understanding of, oh, what's next. You know,
Mhm.
in a school project, the semester ends. If you're working on this giant case and the case settles, do you have something left? And is there that security and safety net around an individual so that person feels comfortable being able to move forward, even if they don't necessarily see what that next step potentially might be?
Yeah.
Absent that, it makes all the sense in the world for them to procrastinate or fudge or whatnot, because inherently, I can't fault self interest if you don't think you're going to have a job when the thing is done.
Right. And again, we're going to jump back to that conversation about expectations being properly communicated is the vital part of this entire equation, right?
Mhm.
It's hard to get people on board if they don't know where their starting and endpoints are and the next starting and endpoints might be. It's all about effective communication. And I think you made it perfectly clear when you said the expectations through communication is key because, excuse me, you have to trust that you have the next steps already aligned up. I
Mhm.
think that makes complete sense.
But it also means, as the steward of an organization, having the reserves in case that immediate circumstance isn't directly lined up.
Mm,
And I think transparency with financials is helpful just so people can see if we don't get this new proposal,
yeah.
there'll be another one, you know,
Mhm.
or to be candid, we really got to put all of our energy into this because should this not happen, then boy, we might get a rocky spot. Let people understand the gravity of the situation, if there is gravity. And if this is hey, we'll get them next time, then maybe that eases some pressure on those individuals. But again, to the point of helping people understand the rules of the game that they're playing, the more that exists, the better the outcome tends to be.
I would 100% agree with that. The idea that people are flying blind in their roles doesn't help somebody avoid a wall. It doesn't help them avoid a trip, right? Or a blockade or barrier that they would run across. And I'm curious to learn a little bit more about your thoughts on transparency. I mean, you've just said a lot of great things that equal, to my mind, they equal a transparent leader. How much transparency is good, and then how much transparency would be bad in an organization?
I can only, and I have a different lens because I'm working with college students.
Hmm.
Uh, I'm a big believer in explaining why we do what we do. And if I don't know the answer as to why we're doing what we're doing, my advice tends to be stop. In particular, young, and this is not a fault. This is not a fault. This is not a fault. I don't want to get into a Gen Z. I don't want to get into any of that. Younger people entering a space want to understand how their work connects to a larger picture.
Right.
And things that might feel obvious to you in that lens may not feel obvious to them. For example, someone I know has a teenager who has started in their employment career and is working at a fast food place. They didn't understand why amount of cars through the drive-through per hour was such an important part of the daily operation. They didn't see
Mm,
the notion of, well, if you get 50 cars in per hour versus 42, the place is probably making more money and you don't have a huge line in the drive-through, and people will go to the drive-through because there's not a huge line, right? It, if you've been in business for a certain amount of time, that's obvious, but it's not to them.
yeah.
And
Good point.
I look at that in the sense of, when there are times I need people to do something, part of my expectation is to help them understand how it fits into the bigger picture.
Yeah.
And that goes back to me looking at mission, vision, value, and explaining ad nauseum, this is mission, vision, value. Here's where this fits into part of that journey. And one of the exercises I do, and it's awkwardly fun. I get into a huge room with a bunch of senior type leader people, or people who have been like on the volunteer boards forever, and I'll be like, "What is your mission statement?"
Yeah.
Crickets.
Yeah.
Crickets. And
It's
they
a,
know it. They know it. But the point is that if it's not off, the new staffer is not going to know it. And that's where you get into this idea where it's like scaling is so damn hard. Well, scaling so hard because you don't completely embed that in everything that you're doing.
100% agree with this.
So the organizations I see who are really smart about it, like, will have it on a business card that they literally give to everyone, and then it's the first slide. It's the first slide of every meeting.
Yeah.
Or it's the environmental on the wall. That's what the mural is, because that helps you guide your decision making, and it helps explain the why. And when that's the method, I think that allows you to have really good ways to understand what we need to talk about.
Yeah. That to me is one of the most powerful things that we do, meeting new clients, talking about what is it they want their business to be when it grows up. And if they can't answer that question, okay, let's revisit this so we're on the same page. And once we have that foundational stuff put together, it's crazy how fast the owner looks to align themselves with the team, and the team automatically wants to align with the owner's vision and mission because they want to be a part of something bigger. As you said, how do I fit into the bigger picture? Well, my role through cause and effect is I need to somehow impact that vision. Okay, now I know what I'm doing, as opposed to I'm an accountant and I just make sure the budget lines up on the spreadsheet. It's a different mindset.
And when you think of, and again, this is a modest tangent. When you talk with doctors who understand ADHD, they will tell you the way certain people's brains are wired, you have to say something 100 times before they hear it for the first time. It's not an indictment of the individual, it's just how their brain works. And then you look at people who have their phones, and you look at what happens when they're on their phones, and that brain chemistry um, can mirror those individuals who are on ADHD. So you may not
Yeah.
have a formal diagnosis. You probably don't, but it's symptomatic. When we go into a process, and when I work with organizations and we go into this process and we really start with the sort of very granular ideas, those sort of core values, and look to be repetitive. The other fascinating thing about that, your meetings get shorter.
Yeah.
And I've worked with organizations and they sort of had the 90-minute weekly, and it got to 60, and now we're like at 40.
Mm-hmm.
I would argue the same stuff is being done, but there's much more efficiency and direction.
Mm-hmm.
And that I think allows you to be able to do things in a way that creates better outcomes for everybody.
I would agree with that. And I think if you start taking a look at those meetings in a way that they're not for discussion, they're more for decision making based on what we said we're going to talk about, you can take that 40 minutes down to 20, right?
Mhm.
Because as long as everybody's on the same page and everybody has the same material and information to work from, they can, in fact, help build a really better meeting by saying, we're all in agreement, or I want to talk about this point regardless. When you understand your piece of the puzzle, when you understand the information that's supposed to be there, and we're all working towards the same common goal, and the expectations are clearly communicated, oh my God, how easy could your meetings be? Now it's just a matter of, do we want to do A or do we want to do B?
Yeah.
Let's discuss. That's a much better meeting than talking about the values of A and B for at nauseum lengths and then no decision is made,
Mhm.
right?
No, that's fair. And the notion too, again, go back to deadline spur action. At this meeting, we're going to decide this.
Mm-hmm.
I would hope creates a space where you could go through a lot of the reasons why something is good. You go through the options
Mm-hmm.
so that when you get in there, like you're ready to deliberate.
Correct. And it comes from an engagement on both sides of the equation. So whoever is conducting the meeting and whoever is participating in the meeting, they all have the same information and you can all work from the same palette, as opposed to walking into a room and being introduced to the information firsthand. That just seems to me one of the most ridiculous uses of a waste of time in business. Is I'm going to walk into a meeting and for the first time I get to learn this information. Now, granted, there are some certain confidential pieces that make sense, but if we're going to have a meeting Wednesday at 9 a.m., I should have a slide deck or an information pack on my desk or in my email before 9 a.m. on Tuesday. Give me 24 hours to digest the information. And when I come to the meeting, I'm fully prepared to have that conversation. To me, that's a very efficient, proactive, trustworthy way of doing business within your own organization. But how many people do that, Dan? Do you really think how many people do that?
It goes back, I mean, it goes back to onboarding and it goes back to
Mhm.
statement of work.
You see
If
it all full
imagine
circle.
imagine when you hire someone at an organization of 200 people, and in the midst of that onboarding, yes, there's things you have to do, like I get it, but there's that explanation of here's how we attempt to tackle these things.
Yeah.
And I feel bad. There was a presentation somewhere where they mentioned their onboarding process. So they don't call it onboarding, they call it something else, but they mention it as basically like a 90-day experience. Yes, that person is taking on task and doing other things and they're physically getting stuff done, but they are also in a situation where they go through that experience of, oh, you're going to meet with the
Mm,
C-suite whatever person, just so you know, here's how these things go. And they're not thrust into that without having some understanding of A, what will take place, B, why it works this way, and C, a couple of hacks to kind of get you off the ground.
yeah.
And so often we get stuck in the space of busy, and it's hard to get out of that and say, okay, well, how do we improve our process so these people can grow? And it's doable, but it's also you having to get out of the way and do that. And if that means blocking out 2 hours of your calendar to say, I'm not doing anything, but this is my chance to figure this out, great. Great. I think a lot of us struggle to take that hole in our calendar and say, no, we're going to use that to invest as opposed to get something done tactically.
Well, here's the funny thing, Dan. We just talked about earlier how we can be a much more productive and effective organization if we based ourselves off of performance than an hourly rate or hourly activity. Now we know we have extra time, so we can actually be more productive on sessions like we're just discussing, or aligning ourselves to the greater good of the business because we're all on the same common goal. It's crazy how it all comes back to the conversation of communication of expectations is big, one. And two, if you base things off of performance rather than activity, you're going to be a much better organization.
And if you work in a circumstance, and yes, I have professional services leaning, but if I managed a Chipotle that idea of spending an hour or two outside of my scheduled shift time to figure out how we make things better, like that to me is the balance equation. That to me is the balance equation. Because if I
Okay.
make that investment during a non-traditional time so that when I'm in the space, I'm better, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's worth it in the long run.
100% it's worth it in the long run. Um, yeah, I love this conversation. We went from a number of different topics back to the same topics, which is great. Believe it or not, we have been doing this for 30 minutes. We're about end of our time. This has been great.
Time flies.
Yes, it
No, I
does, sir.
appreciate the chance to talk through these things. There's so many layers to this, but I hope people will understand that you have a lot more power to design your journey than maybe you
Hmm.
think you do. But you, people always say, invest in yourself, invest in yourself. Like investing in yourself is great, but part of investing in yourself is also time. It's not just money.
Yeah. The idea of designing your own journey is what I want all business owners to think about and move toward, because if you design your journey, you get a chance to live it
Yeah.
as designed. Dan, I want to thank you for your time. This has been great. Everybody, if you need to get a hold of Dan, all his contact information is down below. And we'll see everybody on the next episode of the Legacy Leaders. Bye now.